Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me again on GBN Originals. My guest today is Alan Miller, face to anyone familiar with this channel, co-founder of the Together Association, which has been so front and centre in recent years in insisting that the people are free and that the people are represented and that our freedoms are not infringed by anyone. So it's always a pleasure. Good friend of mine, Alan. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me today, Neil. Great to be with you.
The topic that's closest to my heart at the moment is digital ID, and I know that it's something that you're doing everything you can to confront. From a personal perspective, when I first heard Keir Starmer's announcement that it would simply be illegal to work in Britain without effectively his approval, I had a physical response. In the same way that I would if whenever I recognise a threat to myself or to my family. It was physiological. I wonder how you felt when he crossed the line and said, it's my way or the highway.
Do you know what, Neil? I totally understand that, and that kind of reaction to the outrageous sense of contempt for us all, for all of our history, for all of the things that are so important to us. But there was also this kind of macabre, dark humour within it all, because I kind of am reminded of those weak authoritarians that talk really tough. It's a bit like Keir Starmer on the punch bag. You kind of think, right, now I'm going to punch you, and you think, gosh, if that's what you're going to come up with, it's not that great. Because I think that the theatrical nature of it all and the talking tough, what underlines it is a sense of complete fear, a sense that they have no ideas or solutions about how to address our very real issues that we all face, everything from cost of living issues to questions of health to the economy, border control, all of those things. So instead what they do is they think that everyone's really stupid, and they say, right, this is the solution now. And then what they do is they'll say it's for stopping the boats. They say, well, not so much stopping the boats. What it's for is it's for the health system. Well, it's the health system, but it's also for your benefits. And actually, it's just really convenient. We'll go down the pub. You can do it. So I had a reaction in the same way I had a reaction when Boris Johnson said it's Freedom Day. And by the way, you'll need vaccine passports and digital ID. But at the same time, it's really, in many ways, it's exhausting and it's tiring and it's tedious and it's infuriating. But what Keir Starmer's actually managing to do is unite so many people around the issue of who do we want to be? What do we want Britain to be? Do we want it to be a society where weak authoritarians who have no solutions tell us we've got to verify ourselves to exist and to participate in our own nation, in our own society that our forefathers all fought and died for, against many of these sorts of measures? Or are we going to go along with these guys who he prefers Davos to Westminster, where he likes to call millions of the public names? They want to weaponize things against the public and treat us with contempt. And so I think, in a way, it might be an inevitable situation that we have to thrash out and make good and make clear who we are collectively in Britain, and so maybe this is the thing, this is the time for that battle. So I totally get what you mean, and I'm totally infuriated by the utter disgust they have for the public, but I'm also very confident in the British public and people generally, and it's very different in many ways to what it was, say, 5 years ago, because you can't put this out as a once in a lifetime thing that nobody really understands and knows about. It's a different set of variables, and the public is much more wise to it now, I think.
When, as you say, initially it was supposed to be about stopping the boats arriving on English shores. Then they stepped away from that and said, no, it's about convenience. No, it's about simplifying things for benefits and all of the rest of it. And we're agreed that it's about none of those things. What do you think it actually is about? Why is digital ID in this form being forward at this time?
So I think there's a number of things, Neil. I think that if we look back, it's obviously the case that Tony Blair and the Tony Blair Institute for a long time have thought that the big solution, the big idea in inverted commas, is ID and then digital ID. So any issue that comes up, and we should remember that the promotion and the peddling by Tony Blair around the time of lockdowns and COVID to say that this is now fundamental, we need to have digital ID, this is the way that we're going to deal with things, both from the idea of jabs, and we remember the mandatory jabs, and just to be safe, to keep everyone safe, and then to know everything about how we do things safely. So on the one hand, you've got the Tony Blair Institute, which is enormously influential in Britain and internationally, working with people like Larry Ellison and others. You've obviously got, at the same time, some big institutions like globalist institutions that have been promoting this idea of having everything being able to be seen, tracked, viewed. It's a technocrat's dream, right? The idea, like the CEO of the Bank of International Settlements, which is the bank that kind of oversees the transactions between banks, said, central bank digital currency with digital ID will be great because we'll be able to track every single transaction and everything. So you can see that there are people who are technocrats who are so divorced from the public, so incapable of engaging with winning over people through the virtue of their ideas, so incapable of doing what you do weekly, which is put your ideas out, argue them eloquently and articulately, and say, look, if you agree with this, great. If you don't, we can engage it. They don't want to do any of those things. They don't seem to have any solutions for the problems we face, the enormous problems we face. And instead, what they want is like the Brit card idea, like Call Britannia, put that on the Gov UK digital app, which sits on top of one login, the poorest, leaky, data breachy one login that's already had whistleblowers. You do all that and you get a package and you go, look, everyone, we're going to solve some of these problems for you, and we've come up with a really bright idea. There are a number of different interests that are working here. Obviously, some people look to make a lot of money. We've seen that. Tech companies like Palantir that work with the NHS, they did tracking during COVID, and others. They also did stuff with the CIA. We've seen that, like Infosys, other companies internationally, globally, they all will make money from it. That's true. But the big issue I think we face is that we've got technocrats, people that don't want to engage with the public, that actually hate us. They think that we're immediately going to go out and do crazy things. We're not the great British public that generally looks after one another, that's very kind and compassionate and does things for our neighbours. But instead, we're this potentially rabid mob that, you know, in any minute we're going to erupt into Nazism, as though our grandparents didn't fight the Nazis and beat them, the actual Nazis. So there's a continual distrust of the public. There's a sense that they want to get some kind of control. And there are some arguments for technology, and we keep making this point, that technology is a good thing. We're not technophobes, right? We think there's lots of benefits, but like with all technology, it's how you use it, it's who using it, and it's to what purpose. And some of them just can't get away from the idea of how wonderful it will be to track and survey and then throw in some other ideas about limits and controls, where you're going, what your carbon footprint are, the projection of all these ideas, what you're eating, what you're saying online. And, you know, in case anyone, I'm sure many of your viewers would agree, but in case some people think this is overly alarmist, we only have to look at the last 5 years and the last year and a half to see that everything from debanking certain people with certain views to arresting people, 13,000 last year for so-called non-crime hate incidents, to the whole way that certain ideas are weaponized with policing and the judiciary against some people saying some things and not others, the banning of protests, the banning of people saying things, banning orders everywhere, the Online Safety Act and many of the things around that, that already the idea that we're not to be trusted, we've got to have those brighter and better, they think they are, the ones who fly in jets and go in limos to talk abroad about what should happen, you know, the smart cities, 15-minute neighborhoods, those people that, you know, have already imposed low traffic neighborhoods or lockdown traffic neighborhoods, I would call them, with cameras and bollards without consulting properly and ignoring the public around this new crisis, this new emergency that we have to do something now about, you know, the climate crisis. You must do this now, be quiet, same thing as lockdowns, right? Same approach, all under emergency traffic orders. These technocrats who do not feel confident in their ideas, and I'd say anyone should read the Labour Together brick card policy document because it's laughable. But these people that do not believe in the public and have become estranged from the public, their only idea is how they can limit us and restrict and monitor and ensure that we all do as they think and they say. And I think that that's true of people that are technocrats in Britain as the ones that also are international globalists that go and meet all these things and some of those institutions that we've seen, like via the WHO and the UN, the WEF, and the stuff around UN Agenda 2030 and all those things where those ideas, C40 cities, all of them are committed to the idea that they are the ones with the right ideas. They are the ones that should be in charge. They're the ones who know what the right thing to do is. And our role is to do as we're told and be scanned and tagged and surveyed. And their whole approach is one where they want to sanction and limit and restrict. And I think that's become really, in the last 30 years, the role of the technocrat has been put on steroids. And it really has reflected many of the people that are all going to the same universities. Many of them happen to be in parliament. They all got involved in the life politically. And that's what it is. And the one good thing I'd say about all of that, though, is that those things are happening. But what people call sometimes the populist new backlash or people power, all those things that we're seeing around the world, that is also happening as well as a consequence of these things. And the public saying, well, no more. And that's early, it's burgeoning. But that's also about what everyone does, about trying to inform that and shape it.
Your personal data could be exposed right now without you even knowing it. And if you want it removed, use incogni.com/GB News in the description now and get 60% off an annual plan on us. Incogni reach out to the data brokers on your behalf and request that your information be deleted from their databases. And they'll keep sending removal requests to make sure your data stays gone. Sometimes your information ends up on strange, obscure websites that automated tools just can't reach. And that's why Incogni just launched their unlimited plan with a feature called custom removals. With this, you can submit any link where your personal information appears, literally paste in the URL, and their privacy team will investigate and work to get it removed. And getting started is super easy. Hit the link in the description, create an Incogni account, and tell them whose data you want removed. Grant them permission to work on your behalf, and then all you've got to do is sit back and relax. They'll keep you updated along the way. Incogni is totally risk-free for 30 days. If you try it, it's not for you, you'll get a full refund. So take back control of your personal data today with Incogni. Use our code GBNews at checkout via the link in the description, and you'll get 60% off an annual plan.
I find it very difficult because of the strength of my response to it, and I'm listening to an account of your response to it. You can feel as if, well, if I feel like this, everybody must be feeling the same way. You know, it's like surely everyone reacts to a punch in the face in the same way. But to what extent do you think the general population are with us on this one? It was different, I think, for a lot of people in 2020 when certain things happened. A lot of people were knocked sideways, uncertain, didn't know which way to look. But 5 years later, I think it is very, very different, or I would hope so. Do you think, or to what extent do you think the general people have felt the same response to this one?
I think that we always have to remember that when we're talking and speaking to certain people, there are algorithms, there are echo chambers, there are those things going on, right? So I always remind myself about that. And I like to take the temperature when I'm like where my mum lives in her street, or with other people who are not necessarily running around with the people that I'm running around, we may be in the company of. But what I would say is that 5 years ago, if you tell the nation and the world that we're facing a once in a lifetime catastrophic virus, and most people, let's be honest, that great saying, I'm not an epidemiologist, right? Most people don't really understand. I certainly don't understand those things, how they work, right? So if you tell people that's going on and you have daily press conferences showing how many people are dying and saying we just need 3 weeks to do this, or we're just doing this and you look like you're earnest, then I think that the British public, who are stoic and robust and resilient, many of them will go, look, all right, we get it. Let's do this for the greater good, right? Because there was an element within all of that was positive, right? There were people saying, listen, we can. I remember 1 million people were volunteering to do things. They were shut down. That's very different to 5 years later, where people have seen things like Graham Linehan arrested at the airport with 5 armed police, or Peter Lynch committing suicide in prison, people that have been put in prison for things they've put on social media posts, Lucy Connolly, or things like all the debanking situations, or the free speech concerns that people have got. And across the board, we've seen the post office scandal came out and how people were treated in that situation with IT systems and all of that as well. Just the sense in which, well, this is completely different now. It's not that once in a lifetime thing. Plus all the things that came out, and maybe many people weren't looking, but a lot of people saw it. The lockdown files, the Twitter files with Elon, the fact that Mark Zuckerberg admitted all the things about shadow banning and censoring. When we were saying those things, people were like, are you being paranoid? We saw that, things like the Rapid Response Unit and the Counter Disinformation Unit on people like yourself, me, citizens, doctors, journalists, that they already did all these things. And the public looks at that, and not everyone sees it, but a significant minority might even be the ones that seen it. And I think that, the fact that nearly 3 million people have signed a petition is one thing, but the fact that we live in a very different space now, where lots of people, we've got new political parties that have been formed, a number of them, right? So obviously people know about reform, and it's significant, right? They had 800 councillors. It's not nothing. They're talking about them being the next party. But there's also other fledgling parties that have emerged alongside that. And then there are other parties on the, what people call the left, that are emerging, breaking away from the Labour Party. And many of them, in spite of all the disagreements on so many things, are all opposed to digital ID, right? So you've got these things that are entirely different. I think the skepticism of the public, particularly around the issue of some of the hotels and illegal migrants and the Pink Lady phenomenon, and the fact that local people have said things and they're branded all these names, all of these things together, what happened at Southport and subsequently, has created a very different situation that I think just doesn't fly now for people just to present it in this way, and the public are much wiser to it. So I'm very confident about that part.
I realised very physiological response to digital ID. I remember thinking that I felt uncharacteristically optimistic. I freely admit I'm a glasses half empty kind of a guy, and I always tend to look on the dark side. But completely unexpectedly, I realised that this one was the big mistake, and that it will not work. I believe with every fibre of my being that digital ID will not work. Now, I don't think it'll work technologically either. I think it's a hacker's dream. I think it's going to compromise everyone's safety and everyone's privacy. Criminal breaches that are going to ensue. But I absolutely believe that this policy is going to be the one that changes the way that people relate. Ironically, I think there has been a great reset, and that reset manifests in the form of too many people now do not trust authority. And I think that's a good thing. I was guilty of being oblivious for years. I didn't pay attention to what the authorities were doing, what the various entities and institutions were doing, far less to contemplate what ideology it was that underpinned it all. But I think the great reset has happened, and it's because people like me now realise that you cannot trust these people. And I think that is a very significant development.
Yeah, I think it's definitely true that 100% that the last 5 years and the last 2 years as well from within that has meant that a lot of people are looking at things differently. Well, we should remember that also during whether people were for Brexit or Remain, many of the things that were happening during lockdown, which became more apparent about everyone, were happening during then as well, where people would be, a large significant chunk of the British public were called all sorts of names by people who led the so-called great and the good, the big institutions, and many of the other things. They were called all sorts of names for having genuine concerns about, wanting to deal with some things like borders, like the economy, like others, like democracy, sovereignty, questions around those things. And so I'm in agreement with you that it's really good that there's I like skepticism. I don't want to see a culture just of distrust everywhere, because I believe we have to trust one another. And I've also seen an element of that where people are perhaps some people feel so alienated from things that the very notion that we can trust one another and we can transform things together in good faith with a genuine interest and win over fellow citizens and have that impulse of the demos. There was a sense, I think, that, you know what, we're a little doomed. We can't really trust anyone. That people are always saying, who are you? Where are you from? Like, what is it? And I get that. It's fine. We should check those things. But then there's a sense with some that unless you actually know this person for 30 years, you can't. And the sense that we could have an aspiration, that we could all trust one another. So I think that there's a distinction that needs to be made between having a really strong skepticism from those in power and those who have interests, to a sense that, generally with the public, the things that have shaped things and improved them in the last 150 years, in the modern period at least, has been ordinary people, right? And everything from our civil rights, from things that we've seen, I mean, as it happens and before, and you know a lot about history, but you only have to look back to the English Civil War and to the impulse of parliamentarians and the role of others, and the diggers and the levelers and all the things, the Putney debates, all those important, inspiring things that happened, and then what led on to the modern period and what we saw internationally in the States particularly, and across Europe, and then across Africa and Asia, that sense of national self-determination, freedom, the universal suffrage for everyone. All those things didn't come from smart people writing legislation. They came from the bottom up, from the public and ordinary people being very brave, putting themselves on the line. And we're the beneficiaries of those things. And I think that the skepticism and the ridicule and the criticism are really good. They're really good tools that we should utilize. But also, and people might use the word faith, but I would say trust is really important amongst ourselves, to trust that actually we make this country every day, all of us together, right? The people that run it are really the people that are going out, doing deliveries, being carpenters, being journalists, being like doctors and nurses, all the people in Britain up and down the country, plumbers, bricklayers, the great British public, like we're the ones that keep the show on the road, right? We are hospitality, dare I say it. We're the ones who keep all these things happening. And we're, as Shelley might say, we are that many and they are those few. And that actually the way we hold everyone accountable, no matter who it is, right? The older ones that we might think, I certainly think are now really problematic, but the newer ones that are emerging that I'm excited about. But the way everyone is kept accountable is that the public, all of us, assert our interests and assert our rights and make our voices heard. And that means that we can be active locally, take different forms, meetings, groups, but also some people are standing, some people who've never been involved in politics as local councillors and as MPs, and people might make fun of them because they don't speak in the way that those Russell Group University people do. But actually, I'm really encouraged by it. And just to say, I mean, it's always good talking to you because you know so much about history, much more than me. But, the Labour Party used to have memberships of people that actually laboured, and they represented people who are Labour. And the Conservatives also had working people, right? That they'd have tool makers, or they'd have people who ran a sweet shop or whatever it might be, right? They had a range of different. They're all devoid from people now, right? They don't have a relationship with the public. And that's the thing that I think is the way that we can galvanise the right kind of trust, the trust for ourselves to take more control and to be skeptical about those that are saying we know the best way forward for you, and for us to make sure that the things that interest us or are important to us, we force them onto the agenda. The May elections are coming up in the locals. We've got, obviously, at some point there'll be a general election, but it's not just elections, it's all the things that are going on in between that, right? So, meetings with friends, colleagues, neighbours, rallies, events, and putting through the arguments and winning over those things to sort of, make sure that what we would like to see happens in Britain does, particularly around freedom and liberty and rights. I
do trust the regular people. I mean, I don't know what word you want to use. You know what I mean? The man in the street, the woman in the street. I do, that realization came for me very, very early on in the early 2020s, because I drew my own conclusions after a while that there was something badly wrong. It took me a while. It took me a period of reflection to decide that something was rotten in the state of Denmark when it came to everything we were being told. And then when I started talking to people again, just regular people, people coming to the doors making deliveries, people that I was bumping into in the street, people, the general populace were all quietly saying, "This is insane, isn't it? This is madness." And I was filled with reassurance that out there, unspoken or not, people had seen through it. So I do, when I talk about the Great Reset being about a great distrust, it's distrust of authority. But I absolutely, I've been filled again. I've been filled once more with confidence in so many of the people that I speak to and that make contact with me. Be in no doubt about that. But to get to matters practical, your chest is emblazoned with together, which is an ideal way of underpinning the approach that we ought to make. I wonder what it is when it comes to the practical that you are advocating for the general populace to do amongst themselves and quietly, without fanfare, to push back against this technological totalitarianism.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks. So there are a number of things that we're encouraging everyone to do. We've got, within the campaign against digital ID, there are a number of strands. One of them is that there's an attempt to force 8 million company directors onto digital ID. So we have an open letter petition that is to be signed by directors, but also them that we utilise as part of our campaign to write to councillors, to write to Companies House, to write to the Department of Business and Trade, to write to the Department of Science and Technology, to put pressure on the Prime Minister, to write to all our councillors, to then phone them and to visit surgeries of MPs and to make sure they're clear that we will only be voting for people who oppose digital ID, and that has consequences locally as well in councils. To also address the institutions such as the Institute of Chartered Accountants and others, and saying that the idea that we have to push people who've already got passports and national security cards and numbers to do this is unfounded, and you should not be doing it, and we're putting you on notice. But also we have a toolkit for anyone who is a director or wants to become one, and that gives some information. So there's a bit like more an approach. So whilst we're still doing events around the country, to like town hall style events to address these things, flyers in different localities to go into shops and cafes, discussions to get more people locally being ambassadors to argue these things and put pressure on, and to create a tsunami around that. But not just around directors, we're also doing it with veterans, because now 1.8 million of them are being used as guinea pigs, being offered the idea that you get the veteran card on digital and it will all be great and you can really convenient. And many veterans are saying to us, we fought actually and we served to make sure things like this would not happen. So they're very unhappy about it. And we're saying we get the public backing our veterans, which they do. You know, veterans are homeless. They've had all sorts of measures like IHT and others, treated with contempt. And yet here we are, they're being offered this lovely thing, which they don't want. And also with children. And the children Wellbeing School Bill, which we should remember, this was initiated because due to lockdown, so many children were not going to school subsequently. We've got a lot of kids that don't go to school. Now, some are obviously homeschooled well, and there's a good argument for that, and we can all discuss that in terms of education in the nation, but clearly some are not. And a bit like the Online Safety Act, whilst the idea behind it, one can certainly understand, right? Well, kids should be getting an education. What ends up happening is that the Online Safety Act, kids should be protected, ends up becoming we're all infantilized and treated as though we're children and we have to register ourselves to log on, and there's censorship for everyone. With the Children Wellbeing School Bill, that what you end up happening is that an assignment of a digital ID for every child in Britain ends up happening that then continues. And so ostensibly what ends up being one idea or one thing ends up becoming the conduit to another. So we're also making noise about that. And we're saying, look, millions of people that are older and pensioners, my mum, for instance, can't do any online banking. The idea of keeping cash that we're campaigning around, we lobbied the Bank of England and the FCA around. And we're maintaining this approach to say all of these things really come together under the digital ID, and we've got a digital bill of rights. So we're saying, right, we want a world that we can harness technology, but we must have options to opt out and not be involved and be in the analog world and exist like that. And that must be mandatory. And it must also be the case that you can't be forced into anything, and that you must, like we've got the legislation that came from precedents that an Englishman's home is their castle, or Scottishman's or Welshman's now, in the Union, that the idea that you have to have a warrant to go to someone's house or to listen to the phone or to read their mail, in the same way we have those protections around our digital arena and digital life. So opt-out is one option, and we must be able to retain that, and without having to give any explanations, no questions. And then a series of other things that address those points so that we don't just get one data breach here, or overstepping surveillance there, or yes, you've been censored there. It's not even like we have to imagine the future, because the people who run the state in the last two incarnations, the current government and the previous ones, have demonstrated to us how they've been doing those things already, right? So we're not, sometimes when you say the free speech argument, people go, in the past people have gone, well, you're being a bit dramatic and we're not really China or Russia or North Korea. You say, well, just look at what's happened to us here, right? Where people throwing a snowball were followed by police, or drones were like going after a couple walking in the hills during lockdown. All that stuff that has happened here, as well as the spies and everything. So we're saying that please get involved with togetherdeclaration.org. We have got members. We've got, hundreds of thousands of supporters that are signatories around the Together Declaration, which said that we shouldn't be a papers, please society. That's the way we keep going. We don't have big sponsors or brands, but we also rely on people volunteering and getting involved. But the main thing is our campaigning works. We've changed some legislation. We've had an impact on the temperature of the debate. And that comes through everyone doing it everywhere, right? What we do on social media, what we do when we talk with the press, what we do in like town hall events, when there's rallies, protests across the board. And, all those people that were protesting against low traffic neighborhoods and the attacks on drivers and all around the country, brilliant people, Neil, right? We're people that were running residents associations or small business groups, and they were really smart, really knew their stuff. All of these relationships, working with people like the farmers that we have, and like setting up new groups that work and support, bringing the public in. All of this now means that everyone's in a very different position, and we can push back much more in a unified way.
Yeah, when you mentioned the opt-out, that I think goes to the heart of the matter. That idea that if you want to place your trust in that technology, if you want to do that, if you want to sign up to that, I'm not going to get in your way necessarily. That's an individual choice thing. And I hear people saying, in relation to various policy decisions that have been made, but in relation to digital ID, we didn't vote for this. Okay? We didn't vote for this. It wasn't in any manifesto. But I would say this should never be something that could be imposed upon 100% of the population, even if a majority voted for it. There are intrusions and impositions and underminings of what it is to be a free human citizen that I don't think has got anything to do with a vote. Even, I would say, even if a totalitarian digital ID had been brought to a vote, that would have been wrong. Even if a majority voted and said, yeah, mandatory digital ID, illegal to work if you don't, that to me is an unconstitutional, unlawful wrong. There must be limits to what can be imposed just because a majority votes for it, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think there should be limits to what can happen. I'm thinking about some other examples as well, because we've seen all sorts of things like assisted suicide bill and other things where the state gets the right to kill and other things. And, you know, here's the thing. Because the reason I thought about that as well is whilst you were talking, I was thinking about all this, because these debates are seldom given the time and the honesty, and, you know, we're making proper, true, informed consent means knowing about what's involved and what what the things are. It's like those polls. If you say, would you like everything to be nice on the planet and it be healthy? Most decent-minded, good people say, yes, of course I would, right? If you then say, well, we're a bunch of busybodies and it isn't going to make any difference to the world, but would you like to not go on holiday and only eat certain things and just stay in one area? Then you might not answer in the same way, right? And it's the same thing, right? It's being able to thrash out a discussion and say, what does this really mean? We always talked about the costs and benefits of anything in the past, right? What are the costs of doing something and what are the benefits, and being honest about those things and then taking the public seriously. But we've had those things, haven't we? I mean, like, you know, in the past, the death penalty, I mean, I'm opposed to it. That's, you know, I don't, but there are people who are for it, right? And you can see in different countries, but there are all these questions. And this is also as true for the discussions about Roe versus Wade and others, and about having honest debates and discussions, flashing them out, trying not to just put them under a different term and hope they'll just stick like that. You know, there's all these questions that I think they're essential for the public. But of course, right, what my position is that it's unnecessary, it's draconian. It's a nightmare vision of people and society. And here's the but. There is a but, which is if a doctor can do things like my mum had 2 of her files lost, right? Oh, which is like, you're like, well, where did they go? Well, then it took ages and you can't get hold of anyone, and all the things that everyone's putting up with. You can't get them on the phone, and that will get worse part with the digital ID, because the computer says no, then you're locked out and you can't. But there is a thing where you can say, well, I'm now talking to you. I know this is an obvious point, right? Across the, from here to Scotland, and how can we do things that are beneficial to individuals and that work, that are not under the auspices of a centralized state apparatus that's a biometric surveillance state, but can still have the benefits of so can your GP see some things quickly with your, but is it like, and obviously there's the question of the NHS, there's how you separate it and ring fence it. And that's why having this centralized state that is pushing to bring all those things together into one place, which they can have all-encompassing access to at all times, is the major problem. The centralization, the state itself, rather than because people have already done things like said, right, I'm going to get on my banking system and I'll have a digital app, right? It is true that in the private sphere, the commercial sphere, people are doing those things. And we know that big tech has a relationship with big government. We have to keep vigilant about that. But when you have a state that's doing it, that's where the issue is.
Yeah, I had two of the words that jumped out at me there from what you were saying were draconian nightmare. That's what that encapsulates what I felt when Starmer made his announcement when he stood at that podium. But it's reassuring to know, Alan, that your organisation is out there, because I think that determination to be together as people and to insist that our individual voices are heard collectively. You know, I think it's such an important role that you and your association are embodying at the moment. I'm sure that there will be the necessity to continue this conversation about all of these issues, but for now this morning, Alan Miller, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Neil.
GB News isn't just a channel, it's a family.
And now you can be a part of it. Join our membership for exclusive content and to be part of the conversation.
We're building something different together.
So join us today.
Because your voice deserves to be heard. Become a GB News member today.
Visit gbnews.com/support or scan the QR code on screen now. Thank you.